Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the Bokeh Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Holritz. It's good to have you here today. It's Wednesday. Happy hump day to you. I hope your week has been well so far. I'm really excited about this conversation, this episode today, and I'm going to introduce our guest here in just a second. But before I do, just make sure, for those of you that are live streaming, be part of the conversation today. Join in, ask questions, comment. And as I say so many times, you can send us funny emojis too. Make us laugh a little bit. That'll be fun. And then if you are not listening to the live stream or you're not watching this live, do make sure to follow us at Bokeh Podcast, Bokeh Podcast on all the socials, particularly Instagram. You can follow us there and make sure to keep up to date with the upcoming live stream. Would love for you to be part of the conversation, part of the live stream, and take advantage, of course, of the opportunity to interact with our guests and myself. So plan on that. And really, that's enough for an introduction. I want to introduce our, a brand new guest and a return guest, both. Eden Mitchell is here with me, and Lisa Aihara is here with me as well. Thank you both for being here for this new episode.
Yay, thank you for having us.
So excited to be here.
Well, and I didn't give any context, I guess. So for everybody listening and watching, whether live or after the fact, we're going to be doing a brand position consultation today. It's been a little bit since we've done one here on the show, but really what this gives us an opportunity to do is kind of explore a photographer, in this case, Eden's photography business and brand. Look at a photographer's brand and give them some feedback and some help, suggestions, ideas as to how they might be able to refine their brand and brand position for the sake of being able to capture the attention of potential clients more effectively. And I have to say already, in fact, I'll pull up Eden's site here in just a second, but Eden's making our job easy today with both beautiful work and already a really pretty site. So we'll lead with that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, and even on that note, I should just go ahead and pull this up. I was perusing your site earlier again, Eden, for, I don't know, the third or fourth time, and just kind of scrolling through and you're looking at your work, and it's just absolutely beautiful, beautiful stuff. So yeah, major props to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And so on that note then, and we already have a couple of live streamers joining us. I want to share Sharonda saying from YouTube, hello from Dallas. Hope everyone is doing well today. Thanks, Sharonda, for joining us. I really appreciate that. Shout out. And for anybody else who joins us, don't be shy. Join in, comment, ask questions as we go along here. But Eden, I mentioned to you before we get started, I want to kind of lead with a little bit of an explanation for anybody who doesn't know or understand what brand position or brand positioning is. An introduction there, and then we'll kind of get into the backstory of your brand and go from there. Does that sound okay to you?
Sounds great.
Okay, perfect. So brand position on a really simple level, is that a phrase that you had heard much before, Eden?
Honestly, just on your show, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not one that's talked about a lot in our industry, which is one of the main reasons why we discuss it here. Brand position on a very simple level is just value proposition. And a good brand position is a unique value proposition, right? So if I say I'm a wedding photographer, but there are 100 other wedding photographers in my market saying there are wedding photographers, then I'm just going to get lost in the mix. And in our current 2023 market, there are a lot of photographers, wedding, portrait, or otherwise. And unfortunately, the tendency in photographers have in our industry is to kind of copy paste what the other person is doing, either because they don't know better. Maybe they just simply admire another photographer, or their frame of reference is what the rest of the industry is doing. They're like, I like that. So I'll do those same things. And they're shooting the same way. They're saying the same things. They're using the same website templates and Lightroom presets, and it all just kind of starts to run together. So one of the ways that we can stand out more effectively amongst the masses, if you will, amongst the crowd and the chaos, is with an effective brand position and brand position statement. Some photographers, and you may notice this as you look at other photographers' website, they may have a position statement, but a lot of times photographers just use that for the sake of SEO. Maybe they want to have some cute creative statement that represents how they feel about their photography business. There's nothing wrong with that, but it kind of takes away from the effectiveness of the brand position when they're not thinking about the broader market. They're not thinking as well what it is that they're trying to even achieve as an individual and ultimately a photography business owner. So we go a little bit deeper here with this concept of a brand position statement. And the first way that we do that really is to get context as to your perspective, your intention behind the photography business. And so I kind of want to lead with that. Maybe you can just give us a little bit of a background story. Like, how long have you actually been in photography at this point?
So I guess it's been about 3.5 years now. I'm actually a nurse by trade. So I was a nurse before. And whenever my son was born, I quit nursing to stay home with him. So photography, I've been like, photography has been one of my main hobbies since I was in middle school. And I kind of put it away for a number of years after college, and then like, through getting married. And when my son was a little under a year old, my husband's also like very creative, and
cool.
He's done some photo and video, and we started just tossing around the idea of doing some kind of photo video business together. So we actually rented a camera. At that point, we just had like very old SLRs. So we rented a camera to go on a family vacation, and kind of fell in love with it and ended up buying it from the rental company. And then probably a month later, this business was born. So, and when I started out, I was kind of doing a little bit of everything like a lot of people do. I kind of latched onto a lifestyle photographer that's a big name that I really liked her work, and took some of her courses, and was just kind of doing that, kind of following in her style and everything, and was doing seniors and maternity and newborn and all the different things. So I did that for a number of years, I guess 2.5 years. And then COVID hit, and my business basically came to a standstill, like everyone.
Yeah.
And it was during COVID that this whole kind of kids, children's portraiture was born. So, and that I do still do, some of the other like family and newborn, but my primary focus now is on children.
Well, and your focus and your talent, obviously, it's just,
thank
truly
you.
is beautiful. Really, I'm impressed. And I'll go ahead and we'll talk about your marketplace later on. But I was telling Lisa this when we were chatting earlier. I said I did some market research and prep for our conversation today, and looking around your market, Fort Worth, and even a bit into Dallas as well. I was just, there's literally nothing like it. It doesn't even come close.
Yeah.
So no, please go ahead.
Well, so whenever I, and this might be going into like some of what we'll talk about later, but whenever I, decided to kind of steer my business completely towards this, I had taken some pictures of my son, and I was like, wow, this is, I just saw a lot of value in it. And I was like, what if this was my whole business? But I really felt that, I kind of started doing some research and seeing like, wow, no one else is doing this. Is no one else doing this because there's not a market for it, or because people don't know that they're missing it? You know what I mean? And so that was, but I felt, when I started my business, I really loved, doing all those different kinds of photography, but I definitely felt the more that I thought about it and the more I started kind of focusing on children's, I really started to believe that there was a market for it, even though it didn't really exist yet. And the more that I focused on it, the more and more confident I felt that other people just needed to be convinced that, So,
and I don't even think there's going to be much convincing needed. It's just a matter of getting eyes on your work, because it is so refreshing. It really does stand out from what everybody is in the marketplace is doing. And it's kind of a bit of a rare example, but a beautiful example of somebody, yourself, an entrepreneur, a photographer who decided that, hey, you know what? The market needs this. And you just made that decision and you put it out there, and people didn't realize they needed it beforehand, but now they're like, oh my goodness, I have to have that. It doesn't happen all the time, but it's a really cool example of that.
Yeah, it definitely feels like going out on a limb for sure. But I honestly base it off of my own experience as a parent. I know that other people, it will matter to them, because I realize how much it matters to me now. And just because no one's doing it doesn't mean that people don't need it or that they don't know that they need it, you know?
Right.
So
Yeah, and it's kind of it's a bit of a catch-22 because we can come up with some I mean, there are plenty of things that we like that are highly, highly subjective, and you might be able to find a core group of people that have similar interests. Let's just say if we take a random hobby, for example. It's one thing to be interested in something. It's another thing for there to actually be market opportunity. But the reality is what it is that you're offering here is highly relevant to the market, and that it effectively captures the personality of these children in a way that is it's so poignant, I guess is the best word I can think of. The way that you photograph them with that simple white background and nothing fancy as far as the processing. So either color, black and white, it just allows you to focus on the subject and their emotions. And I mean, it's really in fact, I'd love to have you back on the show at some point to talk about how you get the emotion from these kids the way that you do. Because it's just stunning. It's really, really cool.
Thank you.
And by the way, Sue said from YouTube, she says, hi from Sun Valley. Thanks for joining us, Sue. Appreciate you saying hello and joining us again. And we already mentioned just kind of in passing that you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth, more so Fort Worth market. You said, what, 60, 70% of your business is in the Fort Worth area. Is that right?
Yeah, I do some. So I live actually technically in Mansfield, which is southeast of Fort Worth, like 20-minute drive. And so I do some work down here, but I would say predominantly like within the actual city of Fort Worth. So I'm from Fort Worth, and I have a lot more connections kind of in that area. So.
And I'll share a little bit of some of the stats that I saw from kind of an SEO standpoint when I was looking at both Dallas and Fort Worth from a search term standpoint or a search phrase standpoint later on. But it seems like you've got, there's almost 1 million people just in Fort Worth. So you've got a plenty big market, even if you were just to focus there in that Fort Worth area. And it seems a lot of times it makes sense to continue to focus on where, say, 80% of your business already is, just to continue to double down and keep that momentum going versus trying to branch out. The cool thing is we'll discuss is that there's plenty of opportunity, certainly in Dallas. Dallas is so massive. And when you look at the number of people searching for family photography, for example, I want to say it's something like double or close to double the number of searchers in the Dallas market versus the Fort Worth market.
Oh, wow.
So as long as you have plenty of business there in Fort Worth, keep going. Like no reason to kind of get yourself distracted. But there's always opportunity if you want to expand that when you're thinking about SEO and who you're actually trying to reach. You could always expand to that market and would certainly add a lot more. And and Sharonda said from YouTube, she said, you're in Mansfield. I'm in, how do you pronounce that?
Waxahachie.
Okay, I'm not going to even try.
That's just like 20 minutes south of me, southeast. So, yeah, hi.
Thanks for saying hello, Sharonda. And so let's keep going there because I know we have a lot to talk about. When you talk about the type of photography that you offer, how do you sum that up to your clients? Like if you had one sentence or phrase, how do you currently sum it up?
I think, I'm trying to think what I say on my website, but children's portrait, capturing children's portraits in a way that kind of captures like them exactly where they are, like who they are and exactly where they are in whatever age or stage that is.
Yeah, and I'll actually pull up your website because you describe it really wonderfully. I think there's a little bit on the homepage. Yeah, simple, honest, playful portraits of your kids being kids. I mean, that's a really nice summation. On the about page, you go into it a little bit more, and I like the way that you said this. Photos that take you back to the special way your kid laughed, smiled shyly, made that one silly face, couldn't sit still year after year because we all know however old ours are that babies don't keep. And but the way that you describe the significance of ultimately capturing their personalities where they are, I think it's so important. And again, you're not just saying something and then just for the sake of saying it and then doing something else. You're literally doing that. And I think we've got a really great position statement that can represent that effectively. And we'll get to that in just a second. But again, context matters, and this is why we're kind of going through some of these questions. What type of services at this point are you offering? Is it strictly studio portraits for family or for kids more specifically?
So that is the main, my main thing is just the kids' portraits. But what I was doing before if you scroll to the very bottom of my Instagram, you'll see kind of what I was doing in the beginning of, outdoor kids and outdoor, families and maternity, and then some in-home newborn, and then some in-studio newborn. And so I do still do those, some of those sessions, which, I mean, I don't advertise that like anywhere that's public. So if somebody, usually it's just someone that reaches out by word of mouth, like
Sure.
been a referral, and they say, hey, do you do this? And I will just send them like a private link, to like a private gallery. So I intend to, like, in the future, I would like to, like, move over to doing solely children. But right now I kind of like still having that part of my business,
The variety.
and the variety and the revenue too, so yeah.
Well, that's just, again, that's good to know, because and you're in a bit of a unique situation in that, again, you're kind of steps ahead of a lot of photographers who are maybe earlier in their business, or they've done a variety of things for a while and there's not a lot of clarity and direction and focus in their business. You already have a pretty clear focus. It's obvious. And I will say, compliment, like, props to you in that even though you are offering those other services, they don't hold a prominent place on your website. I think that could ultimately distract from the brand, and you've got a super strong brand already. If you start to add that stuff into the website, then even if it's subconscious, those clients or potential clients come to your site. They're like, is she a child photographer, or is she a family, or is she doing this? It leaves them with some questions. Whereas the way that you're currently set up, there's very obvious clarity and direction for the brand. And I think that's really, really important. Again, if you want to stand out, you need clarity. You need specificity.
Yeah.
That's going to enable you to stand out amongst the other family photographers in the area.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. That's something that I really went back and forth on, like, should I somehow still incorporate this into my website? Or, I mean, I've seen other photographers that have, like, created a separate brand. Like, they have their family,
Sure.
Photography page, and then they create a separate page for, like, children's, personality photos. And I didn't want to do that. And so I kind of just said, you know what, I'm going to take all of that stuff off. And if it still keeps going, it does. If it doesn't, then I can just let it go. So
you've got something good here. And even if you experience an occasional blip, like a downtrend or downward turn in revenue from this brand, I'm a huge fan. So I just want to encourage you to keep pushing, because what you've got is unique.
Thank you.
And you'll continue to be, especially as you establish even more clarity for the sake of the brand, you'll continue to develop a certain level of momentum that will enable you not just to work in Fort Worth, but beyond. Because I've been in the industry 20 years. I've looked at a lot of photographers' websites, and this definitely stands out. So just to give you props there. But just to kind of keep going too, again, further context for the sake of conversation. And for those listening and watching, you haven't heard one of these episodes before, you're like, why is Nate talking? Why is he asking questions of, about the marketplace, for example? When we consider a brand position statement, again, what we're trying to do is not just come up with a cute phrase we put on the website, but a position statement that represents why our brand is unique. But then what that's going to translate to is it literally will drive everything that we're doing day to day in our business. And so as a result, we shouldn't kind of treat it so lightly, right? It's not just coming up with some cute phrases or going, of course, now the thing is to go to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT what it is that we should say on our website. Like it's a lot deeper than that here. We're actually talking about what will ultimately represent a business model. How do I spend my time day in and day out? The work that I'm doing, the marketing that I'm doing, the marketing messages, et cetera. All of it is going to be centered around this brand position. So it's really important to consider it from a deeper personal level, and certainly to look at the marketplaces we're going to do. Just one or two more questions here. What would you consider, as a child photographer, studio photographer, one of your, or a couple of your target customers' biggest pain points?
So, I would say, and this is something that, like, from the beginning of when I started this, kind of switched over to only doing kids, I felt like they were pain points that people don't know they have until, it's kind of going back to what we're saying, like, about just, showing people something that they didn't know they needed. And that's what I feel like the pain points are, like, people don't necessarily, maybe in the past, like whenever, Olin Mills and all that was, like, just part of life. Like, that's, you took your kids to get their pictures taken at the studio. Like, but I feel like now that's not something that people just think about. But I feel like a pain point is like people not having pictures of their kids alone, alone that really show them for who they are, however old they are, like really expressive pictures to help you remember them in that time. So yeah, I would say that's the biggest one. But again, it's something that like I don't think people realize that they have that pain point until you show them.
The other thing that I noticed, and the question really ultimately is what makes your work different from other studios or photography businesses in your area? But I'll just go ahead and say that one of the things that stood out to me was the simplicity of the style of photography. When I think about, I'm a parent of two, and especially when they were younger, certainly a bit of a handful at times. So I know that the idea of going to a studio to have a session done, if there are a lot of moving parts, when I think about simplicity, I think about minimizing the number of moving parts, right? Because we create unnecessary stress for ourselves individually as human beings, certainly as business owners, by doing so many different things. When we have a lot of moving parts in our business and our life, it complicates things unnecessarily. And intentionally, that's part of the reason I'm such a minimalist. But when it comes to business in particular, it makes not only our lives more complicated, but potentially the lives of the customers that we're interacting with more complicated if it takes 68 different steps to try to book you or to try to have a session done with you. And in your case, you've got a simple white background and it's no frills. The cool thing is, despite, and actually because of the fact that it's no frills, it makes the images really stand out. Would you say though that simplicity is intentional for the sake of easing the stress of clients, or is that just it just automatically, or it came as part of the package?
That really wasn't the intention, but I think that's a really good point. Because I do, especially like, I feel like, even though children's portrait photography hasn't really been a thing, for, I don't know if ever, but just when I do think of what I have seen, I think of kind of that really formal portrait photography of kids with like a lot of props or like backgrounds, that maybe are more busy, of that kind of style. So, and that whenever I,
yeah, Lisa's posing for us over there.
Yes. Yeah, I've done some sessions where I've had parents, like grandparents, be like, oh, what if we bring this in? What if we bring this in? Because that's what they're used to, that's what they know of it. And so, yeah, to answer your question, like, it definitely was more just the style, but I do think you make a really good point of it being like lowering the stress of like prepping and going through that session whenever you take out all of those distractions and everything.
Well, and I think it's a really strong point. And again, I'm a bit biased because I'm a minimalist. I like a few moving parts, but the cool thing about it, the benefit there is it really does further enhance your intention, which is to highlight the personality of these children. You take all the moving parts out, all the background, even color out in some cases, and it just, the viewer gets to enjoy the personality of the child coming through in their expression. And by the way, for anybody listening, and I've been posting this up on the screen, but Eden Mitchell, EdenMitchell.com, and then Eden Mitchell Photography on Instagram. Make sure you go check out Eden's work because you're going to be blown away. I'm still kind of amazed, Eden, thinking about the expression that you're managing to capture on these kids' faces. Kids are expressive, but the challenge, of course, is being able to capture it, right? Like, how do you get them sitting there? And so, yeah, I would, if you're game, at some point, I'd love to come back and do an episode and actually dig into that a little bit because it's really,
definitely.
really cool. But the other, I mentioned there are kind of two elements to considering how to come up with or to establish a brand position statement, which of course ultimately drives the business model that we run. One is to consider what it is that we're intending as an individual and then as a business owner. What is it that we're wanting to accomplish and where does that come from? And so we go through some of these questions that we talked about. There's also a certain amount of kind of on a second level, an awareness of the marketplace that is necessary in order for us to come up with a brand position statement. Again, a lot of photographers, they might write, a cute position statement and pop that up on their website, or they're considering SEO. So they're just using all the important keywords. But what we're trying to do here is write a position statement that not only has the benefit, certainly, of SEO, but ultimately represents, in just a few words, what makes your business unique comparison to the photographers around you. In order to do that, of course, we naturally have to look at the other photographers in the marketplace. Now, as I always say here, or I've said so many times, we're not going to call out any other business names. But what I do want to do, because I spent some time going through a bunch of the websites of the photographers, both in Dallas, but particularly in Fort Worth, and looked at those websites, not only getting to see what it is that they're offering visually, but also what it is that they're saying. Not every photographer has a position statement, but those that did or had some version of a position statement, I went ahead and made note of. So I'm just going to run through these really quick. And again, the goal here is to create awareness for ourselves of what other photographers are not only offering, the type of photography that they're offering, certainly the prices that they're charging, but what is it that they're saying about their brand? And as a result of developing that awareness, we're then able to more effectively come up with a position statement that causes us to stand out, to actually be different, versus just writing a cute phrase or a few words. So I'm just going to read through these really quick. And this is doing a search for Fort Worth family photographers, the Google search that I did. And I was just scanning through the business results. And anybody listening or watching, you can do this as well, certainly in your own marketplace, looking at the business results, which play an even more important role than they have in years past. Just looking at the regular Google search results, or organic results as well. But I'm just going to read through these really quick, Eden, just to kind of give you an idea. This first one, Dallas Fort Worth International Award-winning newborn photographer. Fort Worth's leading luxury newborn photographer was kind of the subtext to that. Joyful images full of light and love. Something I've talked about on the show numerous times at this point is, and we've already alluded to it here today too, the cute phrases are nice, but do they actually carry meaning on a very practical level? We have to think about the potential client, our target market, the language that they use on a day-to-day basis, and speak that language. Not using cute words that we hear 5,000 other photographers also saying, and so we just do the same thing. Do those words actually carry meaning, and do they actually represent something? Joyful images full of light and love, it's cute, but what does that actually mean? Those words can be very, very subjective in nature, so we have to think about that. The next one, celebrate your life. Again, it's kind of vague. It's like, what does that mean? And as a photographer, I can start to read into it, and I understand the likely intention, right? But we have to not think as photographers when we're coming up with these position statements. Another one, making your memories last a lifetime. Another one is professional newborn photographer in Dallas, Fort Worth. Custom newborn and maternity photography for busy moms in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. Fetching portraits in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. Newborn cake smash and family photography. That's one I hadn't seen before. Real life and real smiles was another one. Child family senior photographer, South Lake. Lifestyle and documentary family photographer based in Fort Worth, Texas. Dallas, Fort Worth photographers specializing in storytelling. Show the world who you are. Modern innovative senior portraits for teens. Award winner, Dallas Fort Worth photographer. Another one is we curate beautiful images to tell your story. And I'm not going to read through all of these. It just goes on and on. What I will say on a very simple level is that these statements don't carry a ton of meaning. They certainly don't carry enough specificity to enable that particular photographer to stand out. They may play well in some cases, not all of them certainly, but in some cases, for the sake of SEO, they may be beneficial to the photographer. But if a potential client comes to our website, we all know the attention span of most people these days, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, maybe. We need to be able to communicate in a short phrase in the span of 3 seconds what it is that you offer and how it's different from everybody else around you in words, in language that your potential client would use regularly. That's the goal. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And what I tend to suggest to photographers is let's shoot for at the most 8 to 10 words. And if you can get it down underneath that, then awesome. A good template for a brand position statement is to consider, at least the components of a brand position statement, is the service. So you've got the service. This is the thing that I do, right? So I'm a photographer. More specifically, I'm a wedding photographer. What is the variation on that service that you offer that's unique? I could say I'm a black and white wedding photographer, right? And then I can actually take that a step further. I can call out the marketplace that I'm working for. So I'm in Chattanooga. I could say I'm a black and white wedding photographer for Chattanooga, the marketplace, and then talk to my target client couples. So that's a good example. But we're talking about the service, the variation on the service, the locale, if at all possible, to build that in. If not, you can use H2 like subtext, and then the potential target market that you're speaking to. In this case, children, right? What's interesting, by the way, just as a side note, is when you do a search for Fort Worth children photographer or children photography, it has little to no volume. What people tend to search is photographer, just generic photographer has, of course, the biggest search volume. But you have family photographer seems to be where you're at. Studio photography, I think, even had a relatively low volume. Let me just look really quick. Yeah, so Fort Worth Photography Studio has a 210 searches a month volume, whereas Fort Worth Children's Photography literally came up as a 0 volume. And I'm using a tool called Keywords Everywhere for anybody who's listening in or is curious. Keywords Everywhere is really helpful with this kind of search.
Okay.
But then Fort Worth Photographer, as a contrast, 880 searches a month. So you kind of get an idea, just to give you kind of a comparison too, because I mentioned Dallas versus Fort Worth. Fort Worth Family Photographer, you get 170 searches a month for Fort Worth specifically. For Dallas, it's up to 390. So I guess that's over double. Again, if you have the marketplace to serve or to meet your goals as a business owner in Fort Worth, keep focusing there. I think focus makes a big difference, especially in specificity of brand. But if you're looking for other opportunity, just know, relatively speaking, how much more opportunity you may have in Dallas if you're willing to kind of move in that direction as well.
Yeah, that's great to know.
So on that note, and again, I already kind of shared this earlier, but you've made our job. And by the way, everybody's curious. They're like, why is Lisa not talking? Why is Nate dominating this conversation? We're coming to Lisa next because we're starting with a brand position statement. Lisa's going to actually talk about building brand and design, and more specifically talk about the website as well, the colors and so forth. But I again said this to Lisa earlier. I said, you know what, like basically our job is easy here because already you've got just absolutely beautiful work, Eden. It's very clear what it is that you're trying to achieve. And really, it was just a matter of coming up with a position statement that, by the way, is in a place that is really prominent, that everybody can see immediately, the moment they land on your website. In fact, let me just pull up your website really quick, and I'll show you what I mean here. So jumping back to the homepage, when I land on the homepage here, and by the way, whether on desktop or on mobile, what I want to encourage you to do, and again, Lisa can talk a little bit more about this and how you might do this on your site, but what I would encourage you to do is not only establish that position statement, number one, but then put it in a prominent place above the fold. So without having to scroll down to go find text to read about what your brand's about, I want to see that immediately. Now, if you couple that with a beautiful image or a few images, and you can talk to a web designer that could help you with this more specifically, but you couple that with, because you're using so much white space, it's an amazing opportunity to have even a big image as your banner image and lay text on top of that with the position statement. So immediately they know what it is that your business is about. I think that's going to be really, really important. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
And then ultimately you're going to want to copy that to your social media profiles, Instagram, Facebook, wherever else that you're at, so that every single place that somebody goes, they immediately know what your business represents. Just as an example, on Instagram right now, let's see, you've got Fort Worth Children's and Family Photographer. If we're just looking at the actual phrase, you're competing against a lot of photographers because there are plenty of other photographers that are saying that thing. But the moment that you establish that brand position statement that speaks to what unique service you offer in comparison to all those photographers, immediately you're able to stand out. And to be clear, this is just a piece of the puzzle, but it's an important piece, and I think it's important to establish. So this is the suggestion that I have for you as far as a position statement. Simple studio portraits that capture your child's personality.
Okay,
now,
I like that.
What's important a couple of things to note here. So we talked first of all about the template earlier. So the service, right? So you're obviously offering studio portraits. That's the service or the genre, if you will, of photography here. Studio portraits, simple in my mind is kind of the distinguishing factor here because you're literally using a white background. And as a result, of course, the focus is on the subject at hand. And you've just done that so beautifully. I can't emphasize that enough. Capturing the child's personality, that's the emotional component of it, right? You're speaking to somebody's heart. And of course, you're able to do that very genuinely because you talked about the experience that you had with your kids and realizing the significance of that. So you've kind of got a mission built into the brand position statement, which is a bit unusual. You're able to do both in this case, but the simplicity in the studio and ultimately, of course, the goal and the mission being to capture the child's personality. This phrase there's nothing fancy about it. The significance of it is that you're able to communicate what makes your service unique in everyday language. Nobody's wondering what these words mean. We're not using technical terminology or the same, list of 5 or 8 words that a lot of photographers will use, capturing memories or, these other things. You're just simply communicating in everyday language to them what it is that you offer, what makes it unique. Done. And it's going to take all of 3 seconds for them to read that. And considering SEO and the locale that you're in, you could actually make the Fort Worth family photographer. You could and speak to an SEO specialist about this, but you can build that into, say, the subtext or the subheading, and either an H1 or H2 depending on the recommendation, so that you maintain that phrase or that keyword that obviously plays a really important role in that local market when it comes to Google search.
Yeah.
But actually having that statement is going to immediately enable somebody to know what it is that you offer and what makes it different. And here's the thing, you're already doing it with your photography. Some photographers will have a so-called position statement. I'm a photojournalistic wedding photographer. But then they simultaneously have images on their site or on their Instagram feed that are highly stylized and obviously not photojournalistic. So you're practicing what you preach. You make that statement, you've got the images to back it up already. It was really just a matter of coming up with a statement and putting that in a prominent location that will take you that much further. The other cool thing about this though, and you already have a certain level of focus. So again, easy work. But now that you've got that statement in mind, and now that everybody's seeing it, it's going to encourage specificity and focus and intention on your part as a business owner as well. Everything is going to be built around that, and that will further speed up the growth of your business.
Okay. Yeah, that's some great food for thought for sure. I think the thing that I struggle with is I think I worry about the phrasing of, because I've thought about this a lot, the phrasing of like capturing your child's personality, because there are a lot of family photographers, like I think pretty much everywhere now. It's kind of the trend as like an additional service to offer these personality, sessions of kids.
Sure.
That's like an additional, they're also doing all these different, family and newborn. And so for me, it kind of, I worry about getting lost in that mix, even though this is the only thing that I do, like I worry about using that same language and just kind of being lumped in, which what I'm doing is not really that different, like visually, but
I would argue otherwise, actually.
Oh,
yeah. Well, I'll push back.
I think
the only reason I can say this.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Just to give you some context, Eden, because I hear what you're saying. The reason I'm able to say that is because I've done the research, right? I've spent time looking at the photographers who you're competing with, literally. And you can do the same thing. It's very easy. Just do a quick Google search and you're going to see these. And I'm sure you've seen some already. But I hear you in that photographers can offer it. But the simple reality is that nobody is leading with it. When I go to all these photographers' websites, number one, it may be easy for somebody to buy a white background and go take a picture at least similar to what it is that you're doing. I still think you have a unique talent in the way that you're able to capture their emotion, but nobody's doing it. So they may offer it as a side service. Nobody's doing it. They're at least not leading with it. They're not making it the whole portfolio, literally. I mean, your images, it's everything. It's this style of imagery. So nobody's leading with that and nobody's owning it. And I didn't mention this earlier for the sake of brevity, but there are 4 different ways you can establish a clear and distinct brand position. One is to be the first to offer service. You're not going to be the first to offer studio portraiture, right? So that's a tough sell, but it at least has to be mentioned. The second way to go about establishing a unique brand position is to be the first to own a service. So let's just say that, and this is a bit nuanced to be clear, but in a marketplace of a bunch of wedding photographers, if I say I'm a wedding photographer, I'm going to get lost because plenty of people saying that. If I say I am Chattanooga's premier wedding photographer, again, it's a bit nuanced, but if I say that and then back it up with an experience that just blows any other wedding photographer's experience out of the water, word's going to get around and I can back that up and I'll be able to actually lead with that. You're in a bit of a unique situation because the third way here is to offer unique variation on a service. And that's the easiest way to create a distinct brand position. You're doing that. But what's interesting is you also have the opportunity to own this space. Because again, there may be other photographers that are offering this service as a side gig, but nobody's owning that space. Nobody's leading with that. Nobody's talking about it on their homepage. Literally nobody. So there's a potential that somebody might come along and try to start copying you, but you've already led with it. And at that point, they're just copying you. but you have a really interesting opportunity here to lead with this. Even in being in as large a marketplace as you are, DFW there, nobody's doing it. I mean, it's just as simple as that. So I hear you. I empathize with you in that you've heard other photographers, you've seen a little bit here and there. Nobody is leading with this. Nobody's led with the statement. Their work doesn't reflect it. So I would actually argue that you're in a really cool you're in a cool space and that you have an opportunity to offer something unique already. And I wouldn't back off too much from that. It's a bit unique, but you've got it.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm telling you, I'm your biggest fan. I'm going to keep pushing you, encouraging you.
Thank you.
All right. Enough of me talking. I want to kind of hand the mic over to Lisa. And Lisa, maybe you can jump in here and share some of what you shared with me. I got a secret sneak peek, and it's pretty exciting.
Yay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And like Nathan was saying too, we were just gushing about you beforehand. And my only note for your business is to move it to California so that you can
I would love to come to California.
Oh my God, yes, please. Just expense it and come here and just be our go-to photographer, because like Nathan was saying, your work is absolutely stunning and it really speaks for itself, which is amazing. And Nathan, before we go too deep into the design part too, I had a question about that particular word personality, because I thought that was really interesting what Eden was bringing up, that there are people calling it personality mini sessions, right? Essentially. Is there a value in borrowing that word into her brand positioning to kind of capture some of that, or could it be confusing? Like, what's sort of your take on that?
And actually using the word in the statement itself?
Yeah, because that's sort of, we're kind of borrowing a little bit, right, of that name that people are calling this type of photography in their own business, and kind of owning that into her brand positioning. It's using it in a different way, and it's very specific to what she's doing. Does that help with her SEO, even if someone has heard it being mentioned as personality minis? Like, would she be able to sort of capitalize on some of that knowledge and volume that people might be generating for her?
That's an interesting question. The thing is, the phrase personality minis is a photographer specific phrase, right? So the average individual who's thinking about getting their family portrait taken or child portrait taken, that phrase isn't immediately popping to mind. So I don't so much think that we're borrowing that phrase or that word. I don't think it's going to carry enough significance from an SEO standpoint. What it does do is effectively communicate what they're also going to immediately see in those pictures. And it specifies the mission behind the imagery that Eden is creating. So I think that's the value in it. Does that am I answering the question right? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, definitely. And the reason why I wanted to make sure that I clarify that is, like Nathan was saying, the brand positioning statement is going to be sort of the North Star for your business, not just in the business decisions that you're making, but also in design too, right? Because so much of design is so subjective that it becomes really hard to start choosing for yourself, even what shade of blue do I go with, right? Because it becomes like, there's the rainbow and the spectrum is just insane.
Yeah.
But when you have that brand positioning statement, what you can do is check all of your design decisions even against that, right? To say like, okay, well, what are the types of design that I should use to make sure that I'm communicating that this is a simple process? What are the types of, layouts or fonts that I can use to make sure that I'm communicating what it is that I'm trying to do in my business? Because the brand design should never be the leader of it. Your work is obviously the leader, and design, all it does is make your stuff look better. So that's really what we want to make sure that it's doing. And when we're talking about design, I like to use what's called the seasonal brand personality. Have you heard that before? So it's a concept essentially that categorizes all visual elements into the 4 seasons. So that's everything from font to colors to even illustration style and props. You kind of divide it into the 4 seasons. And what that gives you is a vocabulary and sort of an idea to talk about when you're making design decisions, because it's so easy to get caught up in words like boho, right? And it's like, well, what does that actually mean? But when you're thinking about it in seasons, you could say, oh, okay, I know that the summer season feels like this, and therefore these are the types of fonts or colors that I should gravitate towards. So in that
Okay.
sense, when we're looking at your website, what I see a lot is that you are leaning summer. And summer is all about, it's like that classic and timeless feel. Even with your black and white photography, it's not like you're doing super strong contrast of black and white, right? It's like very soft, dreamy, pretty lighting.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would really want you to lean into that. And when I say summer, I think you're like, oh, why isn't it a tropical summer? They're British summers, I guess. So you're kind of like thinking of these like pretty lagoons and what have you. And
Perfect.
yeah, so that's sort of what I'm getting off of that. And I
Okay.
think what we can do to sort of see where we can expand on that is because summer by itself, when it's just summer, it's more elegant and pretty and very wedding marble, all of those sort of almost precious things, which I don't really see from your image. So, what
Mm-hmm.
I kind of think about is how do we balance that out, right? And add in some of the other nuances that we want to bring in. So, when we think of the word simple, and thinking of all of the connotations of it, do you feel like you want to add in more of that sort of warmth and coziness and authenticity of the word personality and simplicity and honesty that I also see in your website? Or does it feel like you want to add in more of the delight and fun and creative energy of that personality word that you have? Which way do you feel like you're kind of leaning right now?
I don't know. I do feel like I have really felt lately like a little bit torn in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like I I don't know if I could how to explain it, but like whenever I initially started, like I really felt like I wanted the brand to be really playful and creative and, all of kind of that side. But the more that I've gotten into it, I also like kind of the element of like wanting to take these pictures and then be like, um, something that is like an heirloom and that like stands the test of time and something that's like passed kind of passed on, for years to come. I also really love that element and like incorporating it into the brand. And so sometimes I've felt like that part of the brand, I wonder if it goes matches with the kind of like playful branding or if those clash. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm.
and so that's kind of
Yeah.
where I've felt like it a little bit of a face off of like, how can I incorporate this all together, but still like, especially like in your last, your two episodes that you did, like, I loved how you talked about personality and just like, I mean, you had so many different great points, but like, it was just really solidified that for me of like the importance of it. And so I want to stay true to that because I am like, um, I do feel like a lot of that is like a part of my personality, but I also really want to have a part of my brand that hones in on like these images being something that like, you get a high quality print and it's something that you pass on and like, so I don't know if that is answers your question at all, but
No, it totally does. And it really brings up this amazing point where not every business is going to be just one season, right? And this is why these seemingly conflicting things need to come together and balance each other out, essentially. So, in your example of, okay, so if we lean all the way into summer, then it's just going to be too much, right? And so it's about, okay, well, how do we then bring in some of the other pieces that feel like they're conflicting but could play really nicely? Because essentially when you're looking at the design, if you're kind of thinking about it tactically, there's a lot of elements that you can work with, and you can sort of think about it almost like building a balanced meal where you have your carbs and your vegetables and your protein too. And you're saying like, okay, well, I want to have a sweet-ish meat today, so I'm going to have a little bit more sour vegetables, and those all still work together. So in that sense, maybe if we are still going to
Do
stay
are,
with,
are you
say,
inviting us to come eat a meal that you're going to
yes,
cook? Because that's
ex-
what's
exactly.
sounds
I
great.
always use food metaphors, even though I'm a horrible cook.
Oh, I was
But
impressed already. I was getting ready to
Yeah.
come over. Yeah.
I'm a good eater, but not a good cook.
Okay.
So in that same sense, right, we're kind of building this meal with your brand where even if you have a color, say that's in that pretty timeless summer feel, we can then balance it out with things like what you're already sort of doing with your logo, which uses a really bold weighted font here, right? And so what
Mm-hmm.
that does is instead of it being just delicate lines and like pretty summer, it adds a little bit more gravitas to it. And
Okay.
what this is doing currently for me is it's adding sort of um, borrowing a little bit from the winter season, which is kind of more about like bold, contrasting, which seems like it's a little bit different from your imagery, but it could add that feeling of professionalism, of, luxury, of no fuss, and
Mm-hmm.
expertise. So that's kind of an example of how it's borrowing from different seasons. And you just make sure that you're leading with one and adding the sprinkles of flavor from the other ones.
Okay.
So, if what I was kind of hearing a lot from when you were talking with Nathan and also when you were describing, wanting to add all of these elements into the design, I think a summer/winter would work really, really well for you. So,
Okay.
because the summer season, like we were saying, it's the blues, it's the muted colors, it's the soft lighting that you're already doing with your photography style, that would make a really good sort of lead singer of your brand design, right? He's the Justin Timberlake, which ages
Okay.
me because for me, Justin Timberlake is always in sync. And then with the sub season of winter, you can start adding in things like the bold the bold contrast on the font, right? So if we were
Mm-hmm.
leaning all the way summer, then maybe your font would be in gray, but instead we're doing it in black to give it that really strong graphic statement there. And then, we're also doing, I think you're doing a really good job of keeping everything super minimal as well, which is also within the winter personality of, all the grid, the lines are straight, like there's no like overlapping, which makes it a little bit more organic and cozy. And that's more leaning towards the spring
Oh, okay.
season per se, right? So like all of those sort of elements do um, contribute to the overall feel of
Yeah, that's so
your
interesting.
brand. Yeah. So if you're kind of thinking like, I'm guessing and I'm kind of taking away from your website this sort of aesthetic that you have, which is you want things to, just like your experience, be no fuss, be straightforward, be simple and honest, and really just focusing on what's important, which is the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that would be a really cool adjustment to make there. And what I would do with your font is maybe bring in a little bit more minimal and modern sans serif fonts in your body
Okay.
text. So I know that you already have a sans serif being used in the website for the header text. That's
Mm-hmm.
stuff like your menu, and then when you scroll down on your bio part to the "Hi there, I'm Eden" part, that's in a sans serif, which means that it doesn't have the feet at the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that font would work really well in this sort of minimal place. And I
Okay.
would actually also change your font color from gray to black, like you were saying, just like in
Okay.
your logo, to give it that contrast instead of just
Mm-hmm.
leaning too much into the pretty summer, which is what the colors are kind of doing right now.
Okay.
Um, what else can we talk about? And like I said, all of this stuff, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that it looks good with your images, right? Because the design
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be, conflicting with it or fighting with it. It just makes it look good. So I love the straight lines that you're using. Definitely stay with that. Don't do like swirlies or like, script fonts or anything. Like keep it really, for pun intended, straightforward. And I think that
But
works
script
really
fonts are
well.
my favorite, Lisa.
I know they are so fun, but just keep it straight. I think the plus sign really works with there too because they are also straight lines and really,
Mm-hmm.
keeping all of that graphic there. And yeah, other than that, like I want to say that I was telling Nathan this. I love your website because it's so simple. People fall into this trap so much where when they're just DIYing stuff, they do too much because they're like, oh, I need to be a designer and over
Mm-hmm.
design things. bad design is so horrible and nothing beats simple design, right?
Mm.
And you
Yeah.
do that so, so well here with
Oh,
the
thank you.
images. And I would have the same note as Nathan as well, where I love all the photos at the top, but it does take a few scrolls to get down to that brand positioning statement or
Mm-hmm.
what it is that you do. Pictures are 1,000 words, but we also don't want them to read a novel before we get to the part. So I think shortening that up and maybe breaking it up even with, we could do a bunch of images, the positioning statement gets moved up and then follow up with more images and kind of do a sandwich might
Okay.
work really,
Yeah.
really
I was
well
going to
here
ask you
too.
about that. Like
Yeah.
how, because I mean, I obviously did DIY this, but
Hmm.
I wondered about like how, if at all, I could get the brand position like statement at the top, if that even would kind of jive
Hmm.
with
Hmm.
the way like, my brand to the side or how that would work.
Yeah. So are you currently using a template with this website?
I am. So this is a show
Okay.
it
Got it.
design, and it's a one that
Perfect.
I bought.
Gotcha, gotcha. So what I would personally do is because I love white
Hey,
space,
Lisa, do
so
me a
I
favor and
can't,
come a little
yeah,
closer to the
yeah.
mic if you don't mind.
Oh, of course, of course. So I
Thank you.
love white space. So I want to keep this sort of feel too. You might even, instead of doing 3 columns of the images, go 2 columns or make the images a little bit smaller to give your logo area a little more breathing space and put in
Mm.
your brand positioning right under there.
Oh, okay. Right under my logo.
Right under your logo. So it's,
Okay.
all in one go. You get the images, you get your name and logo, and you get your brand positioning statement.
Oh, that's a good
Um,
idea. I
I
had not even thought
I
about that.
think, yeah, I would love, love, love to see that. And then I know Nathan always talks about this in his shows, a call to action. I love seeing call to actions in the menu area. I've seen that a lot with a lot of different websites, and I think that would work really well here too, where you have like a little button maybe in between your navigation and your socials, maybe before the vertical line that is
Okay.
separating those two, have some sort of button up there of like
Mm-hmm.
whether it's book a consultation or it's essentially what the contact is doing right now, but make it a little bit more prominent so that they see
Okay.
that, oh, it's a button, or oh, that's what I'm supposed to be doing at this juncture
Mm-hmm.
in my life.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, other than that, I mean,
Yes, that's great
like,
advice.
yeah,
Okay, thank
like
you.
Nathan was saying, you made our life so much easier because you have an amazing thing going. Take your photos as your lead always when you're making design decisions. So even if one day you're like, oh, I want to change out this blue and have a different color be my main brand color, think
Mm-hmm.
about, the way that even you're editing your photos, like what are the colors that you love seeing punched up or toned
Mm-hmm.
down, and choose a color that kind of feels like it's in alignment with that. So if we are
Okay.
going with the summer season for you, that would be a lot of like muted blues, cooler tone colors that are really just like just gorgeous. And I really do
Mm-hmm.
like this blue with your brand right now. So I think that works really well. But if we were
Okay.
doing something else, like you can do like add in a little bit more red, which will make it a little warmer into like a purpley lavender color would be really pretty here
Oh,
too, I
yeah.
think.
Mm-hmm.
If we were going a little more cooler, like a green, but not super like yellowy green and more like a turquoise leaning green would be really, really
Mm-hmm.
nice too. Like the stitching of that
Okay.
girl's dress would work
Mm-hmm.
really well here too.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I was gonna ask you too, like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whenever like I, picked my color palette, there was not a lot of rhyme or reason to it other than like I picked colors that just looked kind of playful. And so
Mm-hmm.
like even like I mean the blue, I knew I wanted the blue to be kind of the main color because I just love that color blue. And I felt like it wasn't too loud and wasn't too, like neutrals. I feel like everybody's doing neutrals right now and I just didn't want to just do neutrals. And
Mm-hmm.
but then like the like on I think it's on my one of my pages, maybe on the portfolio page, or I use this or no, it's on the details. I use this purple. I don't know if you saw that.
I
That
did. Yep.
does it feel like does it feel like it goes, or does it feel like kind of just a grab a color? If you know what I mean.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean. So I would, in addition to that purple, take a look at how that purple and the blue and the beige that you chose for your footer feel together.
Okay.
And for me, it leans a little warmer, which means that it feels a little more red than what I would
Okay.
personally expect in a color palette. My go-to formula when you are picking a color palette based on one main color that you love, which in this case would be the blue, is to get your main color and then add two colors that feel sort of in that same color family. So it's, maybe a different version of that blue, like that blue, but a little more red and a little more purpley. So I think
Okay.
with the purple that you actually have in your details, it's actually a lot more red and also a lot more, has a lot more color contrast in it versus the mutedness of the blue. So a little bit more
Okay.
muted, a little more blue purple, I think would work really well, as well as
Okay.
maybe like a more greeny, turquoisey blue version of your blue.
Okay.
And that kind of rounds out your three main people there. Add
Okay.
in
Lisa,
accent color.
do you sorry to interrupt, do you use
No.
any kind of palette, like color palette generators? This is something I've used in some of my, at least, efforts at design in the past. Is that something that you recommend, or what are your thoughts on that?
I do like color palette generators, especially if you just have that one color and you just want to, call it a day. But I feel like color is so personal to people that sometimes you want a color to work with the color that you have, that maybe a generator and that sort of like mathematical algorithm won't think that it works together, right?
Okay.
But even if you're like, you know what, I want to do red, white, and blue, even though that's like super American flag, there are reds and whites and blues that can work together without it being so primary color, right? Because there are a million shades of gray, as the popular book had said also. And there's also a million shades of red, million shades of blue that work together and can complement each other. So I think it could work as a really great starting point. And then
Okay.
maybe you look at one of the colors, because it's probably going to do a lot of very similar feeling colors. And you're like, okay, well, I don't want like 3 greens in my palette. Maybe you just swap out one of the greens for a color that you do like, and then try to tone down the saturation or change up some of the color proportions to make it into the version of purple that works with your blue.
Okay.
Do you recommend any particular, like, if I know for me, I like to have some starting point, like some frame of reference. I've personally used it's called Coolors, Coolors.
Oh, yeah, that one's a good
.co,
one.
I think. I'll pull it up here for anybody who's curious. But is that, I mean, just as a starting place, is that something that you would recommend, or is there another generator that you prefer?
I like Coolors, and honestly, most of the generators are pretty equal. So I would say just
Okay.
choose based on the UI that you like, because that also, changes a lot. And any color generator, most of them will also have a color wheel that you can play with. So when I'm saying like, add more red to it, you're just kind of going more on the red side. Add more
Okay.
saturation to it means like, go up higher to the more reddy part of it. And then desaturate for you would be like go more towards like the gray part of that color wheel. So you kind of build it that way. And then it'll also give you the hex code of it so that you can have that as a cheat sheet on the side, paste that everywhere. So whenever you need to make your update on your website, you know that hex code by memory, which is what you want to kind of aim towards. You probably know that blue code off the top of your head.
I haven't used it in a while, but I did have it pretty much memorized. And I would like lose it and then have to go find it. And,
Do you also recommend any particular site, Lisa, for, I mean, you mentioned earlier the font, like maybe shifting the font a little bit to something to sans serif, maybe a little simpler. Do you have any particular fonts that you'd recommend, or do you recommend going to a particular site to look at those? How do you recommend approaching that?
So for me, I love Google fonts because they're free. And most websites, like services, whether it's Showit or even Canva, when you're making things, will have a Google font. So I hate having to find a font that I love that only one website has and try to find another font that looks kind of like it when I have to use that font on my, website or on Canva or what have you. So if you find something that you like on here, you will know that it's everywhere. So I would always recommend going there unless you want to start paying for fonts and then kind of downloading it to all of the places that you want to use it in. But it's kind of a pricey investment to make, especially when you're kind of starting out and you're not even sure if you're married to that font. Like, start dating around with the Google fonts would be the way
The
that
Tinder of fonts, Google fonts.
Tinder of fonts, yeah. And then you can always swap it out when you don't like it and see what sticks.
Oh man, we could go so many directions with that. That's fun. Okay.
So fun.
Do you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there a font or two off the top of your head that you might suggest she at least take a look at based on your recommendations earlier?
Let's see here. So I really love, I would say keep the sans serif, so the header font that you have right now. I really like that. So I would say keep that. And then I did see a couple places, I think it might have been Portfolio, where I saw a different font being used as your header. So make sure that all of the headers are the same. Especially when you're just starting out, I would say just pick two fonts, one for your headers and one for your body text, and kind of call it a day.
Okay.
Then it keeps it pretty easy for everything. So that I know that Portfolio is probably a different font. So I would say adjust that. And then for your body font, I do like this serif font. So this is the serif because it has the little feet, right? Those are the prettier fonts, as I like to call them, because they kind of, feel like a book and kind of antique-y and really pretty. This is kind of leaning more into that summer season too, right? Because it's very delicate. It has the really, thin lines. I do love this. I think you can also play with something like, what font is this? Is this Laura or is this a different one?
I think it is Laura, actually.
It is Laura. Yeah.
Yeah,
Laura's
good
one of
eye.
my favorite. It's my favorite. One of my favorite serifs. Like.
Oh, really? That's funny.
Yeah,
Okay.
I love this one. I think would work really well. And what is the font that you're using right now for your for the logo?
I am not sure. Let me see. Oh, you know what? That's actually it's in Canva.
Oh, gotcha.
So I just made that. Yeah.
So another way that you can play with it too. So say that, you find whatever that font is. If that font has different weights, like if they do have a regular weight of it not being so bold, then you can use that as your body text as well. Is another way where you can keep
I hadn't thought about
kind
that.
of consistent. Yeah. So if you do find this, sometimes there's this unicorn font that you love, and it also comes in a gajillion different versions. You can then use that same font, but in its different weights to give it different feels, but it still is very cohesive and it kind of goes
consistent.
together.
Okay.
Yeah. That's my cheaty way of picking fonts.
No, that's a great idea. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah.
Before we finish up here, Eden, any last questions for Lisa or myself regarding all this? And by the way, Lisa, I just love how tangible and practical that experience was just now. So thank you so much for sharing all your advice and wisdom.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yay.
My tendencies, and Lisa knows this well about me at this point, but I do tend to be a bit more of a black and white person, literally and figuratively. And so to have Lisa's advice and expertise when it comes to the more creative side is really, really lovely. And I guess I've never would have thought about thinking of colors from a seasonal standpoint, but that's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like it simplifies it for me, at least.
Yeah, and it's also a Google search away where if you search, summer brand seasonal personality, then it will give you different palettes as well. So you can even use that as a launching point when you're building your color palettes and say like, oh, maybe this blue is, more specific blue that I like, and then kind of build it from there.
Okay,
Lisa,
cool.
Before we finish up, will you just share briefly for our listeners, because I really want them to know how they can find you, follow you online, reach out to you if they're looking for conversation and services ultimately similar to what we did here today. Can you just share a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So my website is ellettestudio.com. You can find all of my info there. I'm hanging out on Instagram a lot. So if there's something that we talked about today, like, oh, I want to know what my season is, like what what are some ways that I can add subseasons into my branding, you could just send over a DM. I'm nice for the most part, so you can definitely chat me up there. And I love geeking out about all things branding with everyone.
Perfect. Yeah, nice for the most part. I like that.
Yeah, I want to be honest, right?
Yes. Well, I really appreciate both of you. Thank you, Eden, for letting us have this conversation today too. I mean, it's so helpful and valuable for those that can listen in and learn from this whole conversation, because it really isn't discussed nearly enough in the industry. But I appreciate you being willing to have the conversation live and on air for everybody else's benefit. Thank you, Lisa, as well, for making time for us and sharing your wisdom. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank y'all so much. This was a lot of fun.
That was so much fun.